So this is our first Q&A session for Romford Horror Festival 2023, and I have the great pleasure of having Mark Willsher here. And Mark, tell us a little bit about your involvement with Puppet Killer.
Well, my involvement was mixing the score. This was, as Lisa mentioned at the beginning, this was a Canadian production, and it just so happens that a good friend of mine in New Zealand wrote the music for it, and I mixed it for him, which was all done here in London, so I happened to be the person in London. So as Lisa mentioned at the beginning, the film was primarily was a Canadian production, but a friend of mine in New Zealand wrote the score for it, Stephen Gallagher, and I mix all his music, so I did that here in London, which is how I happened to be the person in London to come to the festival. But it actually was very exciting to see it because it's been a few years now since the last time I actually saw it, and quite a while since I mixed the music.
And so you saying about it's been a few years, it was actually a few years since we last showed it. So we showed it as part of the Romford Film Festival in 2020, and we ended up showing it 3 times, and it sold out 2 of the screens. So this is why it's ended up at 10 o'clock in the morning, because I thought, oh, everyone will have seen it. But no, there's about 100 people that were here that hadn't seen it, which is great. So reflecting back on it, now that you've seen it, I mean, it's still quite a low-budget film.
Yeah.
You're somewhat... How do you think it holds up?
I would say it actually holds up a lot better than I would have thought.
Yeah.
When we were working on it, I thought the concept and the storytelling and everything was great, but it was sort of unclear how much of a life it would have beyond sort of initial viewings. But it was certainly very, very enjoyable to me to watch it again with a few-year break, and it's been really impressive, sort of the fan reaction to it and the number of people who have watched it multiple times. And it seems to have a life of its own that has continued in a pretty impressive way for low-budget independent film.
It's I know it's probably going to sound like a silly question, but how is it to work remotely on a project that's going across different time zones? Does that complicate things more?
Not too much. I mean, the composer Stephen Gallagher I've known for about 15 years, and we've done a lot of work together over that time, with it probably the majority of it being remotely. It's a little hard, obviously, with New Zealand, because there's a 12-hour time difference from here. So, it's usually, when we get together, it's usually either early in the morning for me and late at night for him, or vice versa. On the Canadian side, it's not too bad, the time difference, to Lisa and the team over there. But I'm actually kind of used to that, because I've always done quite a lot of stuff remotely, and then actually since the pandemic even more. So plus there's the benefit in some ways of a situation where Steve can write music and then I can mix it while he's sleeping, and he can wake up and hear it.
Yeah.
So that actually in some ways can be quite efficient.
Yeah. And for you, did you have like a favourite moment when you were working on the sound and design? Did you have a favourite moment of the film?
It's hard to say if I had a favourite moment, because there were a lot of good moments. But I actually like in the part that I enjoyed the most working on was actually the opening scene, with when Lisa's the mother. And that, and the treehouse, and the sort of music, the way the music shifts and works throughout that, and sort of really sets the tone for the relationship between Simon and yeah, I mean, that was definitely, and what was interesting actually about that is that scene was, when I worked on the film, we worked on it, we finished the music, and then that scene actually got reshot. And redone, so then it sort of came back, and it was, both Stephen and I were really worried that it was nothing would work and it would have to all be redone, but actually it was pretty impressive what Lisa and the editor had done in recutting it and putting it together, because it just kind of fit what we already had.
Yeah. For those that aren't too much aware, can you explain a little bit about the process of sound design?
Well, the sound design, so the sound designer on this was Robert Finniff, and he would be much better able to talk about that. For me, it's my involvement is really on the music side.
Yep.
And on that side, what sort of initially happens is you have, which is no different than sound design, is you sit down with the director and whoever else is involved creatively on the team, and you talk it through about both sort of what's going on, but also what is desired, because obviously it's not what may be desired is not what is necessarily represented visually at that time. So you kind of do a sort of what is effectively called spotting. You go through and you take notes and you talk about what's needed, and then the composer goes away, in Stephen's case, and starts work. And it was kind of interesting with him. I asked him before I came out here, whether he had on his side of things any sort of interesting anecdotes from his process, and he didn't really have any. But what he did say is that he, after watching the film the first time, all the time that he was writing the music, he sort of had this vision of being a composer in the 80s in a basement with a bunch of reel-to-reel tape machines and analog synthesizers, and writing, doing a score for one of the films from that era, and that was sort of always forefront of his mind. But anyway, so he go obviously on this type of budget, there aren't any live musicians. It's all stuff that Steve's created himself. Whether it's synthesizers, there's a little bit of orchestral samples, but most of it is electronics and samples. And he did, there is actually a section in there which is not, I'm not sure how clearly it comes through, but is actually his son's heartbeat from when he was in the womb, that he kept this recording around and uses it in a few places. And it's actually kind of a good way to create sort of tension and intimacy at the same time. So anyway, so he sort of works on that and creates all the tracks and has a rough version. Then he sends them to me, and then I basically go about reshaping the sound of them, the balance of them, and the space of them to work in a theatrical venue appropriately. So
and you yourself, outside of Puppet Killer, you have quite an impressive body of work. Do you want to tell us anything that you're working on or been working on recently?
Well, recently, up until for probably most of the last year, I've been working on an upcoming musical, which is this film called Wonka, which is a prequel to effectively to the 1971 Gene Wilder Charlie and the Chocolate Factory film. In terms of, I worked on all the Lord of the Rings films, which is how I met Steve in New Zealand, because he came on and worked on the Hobbit films with us. And other things right now that I'm working on, unfortunately, nothing in the horror vein. But Steve has another project coming up, which is not known too much about right now, which will probably be a lot of press about in the coming months, which is pretty exciting. And then a good friend of mine from San Francisco has been working on a film with Jim Capabianco, who did the Ratatouille Pixar for a long time. He has a little stop-motion animation feature about Leonardo da Vinci's life,
yes, which
is really very, very charming, and actually has quite a few songs. They got Daisy Ridley, Stephen Fry, Marion Cotillard, and Matt Berry are all voice actors and singing in that. And then Netflix is actually, I don't know if anyone's seen the Ultraman TV series on Netflix, but Netflix is doing a full-length feature film about Ultraman, so that's another one.
That's cool. And just lastly from me, what made you get into this line of work?
Well, originally I was a trumpet player, and which is what I went to university for, and did a music degree. And during university, I needed a job, and the music school needed people to record concerts.
Yeah.
So I kind of did that, and I guess I was okay at it because people stopped asking the staff at the school to do it and started asking me to do it. And over years, over the course of my degree, I started playing less and doing more production. When I finished that, I went and did a sort of a postgraduate audio program that was really focused on orchestral, classical recording, which is what I really thought I wanted to do. Yeah. I spent a bunch of time in studios in LA after that as well. But then I sort of fell into film almost accidentally, and discovered I really, really enjoyed it, and had a pretty good instinct in terms of music and storytelling. And then it just kind of kept snowballing from there. I still do music-only productions, but the vast majority is film.
Have we got any questions down here in the audience? Oh, we've got some right over there. 2 questions. 2 different people.
I'm curious why, and you might not know the answer, but it's just going to drive me back. But why didn't you hire a nice cheap intern actor at the age of 17 who would work for free, rather than whatever you pay a 50-year-old guy to play a 17-year-old?
Well, I don't know all of the story behind that, but it was very deliberate on Lisa's part that she wanted older actors, and obviously part of that is that in a lot of the films from the 80s and 90s, while it's not this extreme, you do have a lot of people in their 20s and sometimes early 30s playing these high school students and young kids. And so part of that was definitely a reaction to that, and a sort of a way to take it over the top. But it was definitely always her intent from the beginning, for it to be middle-aged actors playing as teenagers.
Yeah, I always think that's part of the magic of the film. You know, is that you literally take the John Hughes films and gone really over the top in terms of the age category. I think we were having a conversation. We were saying that the dad is actually younger than the son, which we think was really funny. So sorry, we've got another question over there.
Hi, thanks for the film. It's the first time I've seen it. It reminds me of another film that was made the same year called Penny Loves You, which I'm sure a lot of people may have seen. I've got to ask, because I know them well, how did you get the Sausages on board, or do you know?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question clearly.
How did you get the Sausage Sisters on board, the cameo?
Oh, well, they were actually originally involved much more in the film. I don't know all of the details, but they were involved early on in the original script. So that was they were there from the involved in the conception of the project.
Any other questions, Alan? No? Okay, well, listen, Mark, thank you very much for travelling over and seeing us.
Oh, my
thank
pleasure.
you for your work on the film, because I'm sure everyone here will agree it's a fantastic film. It sounds great. It looks great. Thank you ever so much for coming. We really appreciate it.
That's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.